what makes Jung's Aion terrifying. I think Peterson's point about Aion being terrifying is that you have to take back within yourself a knowledge of your own capacity for, quote, evil. Jung isn't prophesizing anything.
The future of mankind very much depends upon the recognition of the shadow. Evil is, psychologically speaking, terribly real. It is a fatal mistake to diminish its power and reality, even merely metaphysically.
Okay, so the reality of evil is a major part of Jung's Aion. So I can see why the creator of this video started with that. I just want to say from the start that I don't know this creator personally, and so whatever I say in this video is more about the Jungian community in general and interpreting and understanding Jung. And I want to say that, like, this video is just taken off. It's over 100,000 views right now. Why Jung's Aion is terrifying. And I think that stems from that sort of Jordan Peterson type of look at Jung. And Peterson in his early days is lecturing about Jung in classes on personality. But then later he's also like saying, like, I don't know, like, maybe I do believe in Jesus, you know? So I think that plays into what we're going to see in this video, where the religious feelings get brought into a reading of Jung, or parts of Jung.
I'm sorry, this goes to the very roots of Christianity. Evil verily does not decrease by being hushed up as a non-reality or as a mere negligence of man. In Jung's Aion, he prophesizes the coming of an antichrist. Now,
okay, right there, that's what I'm talking about. In Jung's Aion, he prophesizes the coming of an antichrist. Jung isn't prophesizing anything. In fact, I have a video that I did earlier on, is Jung a prophet? And the reason I did that video is people often come up with this idea. Nowhere in his entire collected works will you find prophetic material. He considered himself an empirical psychologist, meaning that his writings will utilize material from astrology or myths or really anything that he can get his hands on. But he's always speaking about our individual psyches as personalities and what that material means symbolically for an individual psyche. So in Aion, I can guarantee you, and actually I had a mentor, you know, confirm this, that he's been studying Jung, teaching Jung for 50 years plus, that there's no prophecy to be found in Aion.
according to Jung, it is already here. We are in the beginnings of this new Aion. This is why
it is already here. We are in the beginning of this new Aion. So that, I think, it's this tone that I think makes the video so popular, is that it has this drama like a Hollywood movie. And there's nothing wrong with doing religious stuff, having religious ideas, looking at scripture, but you're not going to find that in Jung, and putting that on Jung isn't fair to his work and his commitments and his legacy.
many of those influenced by Jung, including Jordan Peterson, described Aion as terrifying. So why is the Antichrist coming? Well, Jung argues because the Christian world has not assimilated its shadow.
Why is the Antichrist coming? It's a basic misunderstanding of what Jung's doing, and it plays into it plays into like other larger themes on the internet. I just noticed there's another video, Aion, Carl Jung and the Antichrist. So obviously this image links up into people's psyches today, but I can say right now that when Jung is describing the Antichrist, he's talking about the individual's relationship to evil, that life itself is guilt, he will say, and that the reason that he goes so into Christianity and metaphysics of Christianity and this argument that evil has no substance, that it's only the absence of Christ, is that he argues, no, evil actually does have a substance. Evil is actually real, and it's a part of us. And it's not like... Okay, so let's keep going.
For far too long, Christians believed, according to Jung, that our fundamental nature can only be good. When we do evil, that is not really us. In this way, evil, embodied as Satan, the shadow of Christianity, is ignored, just as an individual may ignore his own shadow. One can choose to ignore it, but only for so long, before there is a moment when everything comes crashing down. Of the split of the God image into two irreconcilable halves. This was a necessary step in the development of consciousness in humans, but it has led to a profound one-sidedness and to a disassociated condition that now has to be corrected. Christ is without sin, of spotless virtue, and Satan is his shadow. If we look at this biblical drama between Christ and Satan psychologically, we can understand it as the timeless conflict of good versus evil that takes place within ourselves. We cannot have one without the other. The Antichrist develops in legend as a perverse imitator of Christ's life. He is a true and imitating spirit of evil who follows in Christ's footsteps like a shadow following the body. Since the dogmatic figure of Christ is so sublime and spotless that everything else turns dark beside it. It is, in fact, so one-sidedly perfect that it demands a psychic complement to restore this balance. This inevitable opposition led very early to the doctrine of the two sons of God, of whom the elder was called Satan. The coming of the Antichrist is not just a prophetic prediction, it is an inexorable psychological law.
Okay, so the quotes are good because it's Jung. When he says it's a psychological law, he's saying that not only in the individual, when one's identified with their perfect moral goodness, the ego, or with Christ, that the coming of their lax and unpermissible self is an inexorable psychological law that will come, and you could carry over as the Jungians do into a collective phenomenon, that if you have an era of this sort of like lofty Christ identification, that you're going to have the Antichrist in the unconscious, in the collective unconscious.
This conflict demonstrates to us that one must assimilate both his capacity for good and his capacity for evil. If one does not do so voluntarily, it will come involuntarily, whether we like it or not. This is a psychological law according to Jung. So what is the evidence of the coming of the Antichrist? Jung says, a factor that no one has reckoned with, however, is the fatality inherent in the Christian disposition itself. Think of it like a swinging pendulum. Jung says that the Christian Aion began when Christ was born in 1 AD, lasting until 2000 AD. This time period is that of the Pisces zodiac. After 2000 AD, we move into a new zodiacal age, of which, as of March 2020, we have now entered. Jung argues this is the period in which the pendulum swings back. In other words, the anti-Christian period, or the Antichrist. Jung gives the example of the Renaissance, exchanging the heavenly goal for an earthly one and the vertical for a horizontal perspective. Voyages of discovery, exploration of the world and of nature. The subsequent developments that led to the Enlightenment and the French Revolution have produced a worldwide situation today, which can only be called anti-Christian.
So Jung is basically pointing out that the Christian era, because it was anti-body, anti-sensuality, would inevitably be compensated by Antichrist era, which is marked by what he's calling scientific materialism and social realism and so forth.
Sense that confirms the early Christian and in the 20th mastered conscious knowledge. He knew everything about everything, yet was still unfulfilled and unhappy. So much so, he nearly committed suicide. The devil came to him, whom he made a pact with, so that he could feel happy once more. He looked for this in the material world, of matter, of the senses, in a beautiful woman, for example. He looked everywhere, but in himself, which is what he needed to do all along with. Jung argues the timing of this story was not coincidental. It heralded the coming of the end.
So on Goethe's thing, Jung's point about this heralding the end, it's that Jung is arguing that artists are capable of being attuned to what's going on in the larger collective psyche. The psyche of the artist is attuned to any compensation that's necessary by the unconscious.
Christian Aion. Society is now more focused on finding God on earth rather than God in heaven. The idea of God, which has now been replaced today with a science, rationalism and logic, highlights how the human mind has sunk deep into the world of matter rather than aspiring to the world of the spirit. This is exemplified.
Okay, so this is where the video starts to continue on with a split. Jung's whole point is that these two opposites, spirit and matter, when one is emphasized, the other one will go in the unconscious. And he's arguing for a comprehension of wholeness, which is where at this point in the video you start to see that the author has a preference for spirit over matter.
In the Gnostic myth of the Nous, who beholding his reflection in the depths below, plunged down and was swallowed in the embrace of Physis. We believe that the material is the new God rather than the spiritual. Today, for example, we aimlessly try to satisfy our spirits in things, in buying new clothes, on striving for status, on seeking comfort and food, rather than seeking self-knowledge of what unconsciously directs our lives, accepting coincidences as meaningful and submitting to this unknown yet all-powerful and generative source which we all feel. One might understand this better if he was lucky enough to be in love. We believe that the solution is on material earth somewhere, and we...
So this is where he starts equating spirit with the self, with the totality of the personality or the potential for wholeness, placing the material world, matter, in opposition to spirit as a mistaken venture. Well, Jung's point is that no, this is the compensation was necessary as a psychological law because the psyche seeks wholeness. And that's where I start to feel that it's around this 3/4 mark that the video takes on that increasingly more religious tone outside of, I think, Jung's interest and work and his sort of perspective that I mentioned at the beginning.
Just have to find it. We can never find it there. How does one look inward? Well, we could start by acknowledging our shadow. How to do that?
By looking inward, you might actually end up looking at your material self, your body self. You know, it's not in spirit. Spirit and matter are not the lost value. In fact, many people are still suffering from that Christian era of repression towards the body. And despite the materialism, because it came in a compensatory mode, a compensatory state, the materialism is very superficial, and it doesn't actually meet the genuine content that had been and is repressed in many people.
Can be found in our video in the description below. Among the oldest sacred texts in the world.
I haven't watched his video on the shadow, so no comments, but right here,
of a Hindu Veda.
We bring in the Hindu Vedas. We're going to utilize the Hindu Vedas here.
It says there are 4 time periods, of which we are in the final. This time period is known as the Kali Yuga.
So now he's evoking the Kali Yuga as its final time period and the prophecies that are going to be found there within to bolster his premise that we've lost ourselves in the physes in the material world and our souls caught there, and then the doom and gloom, an apocalyptic vision of the future.
The period of destruction. It prophesizes the following events in this time period.
Okay.
Rulers will no longer...
I'm not going to go through all of these, but he comes up with a big list of many fake ideologies will spread throughout the world. Weather and environmental will degrade. Okay, that's fine. I actually don't have a problem with religious prophecies and people who believe there's an end time. I'm not here to criticize you. I'm just saying that that's not what makes Jung's Aion terrifying. I think Peterson's point about Aion being terrifying is that you have to take back within yourself a knowledge of your own capacity for, quote, evil, but also reckon with your instinctual side, And that's exactly what this video lacked in making clear, and it rather has put on this religious tone. And he also evokes Jung's, quote, vision on his deathbed about an enormous stretch of devastation. Enormous stretches of the earth were devastated.
Is von Franz, who says, "One of his daughters took notes and after his death gave it to me. And there is a drawing with a line going up and down, and underneath is the last 50 years of humanity. When I saw him last, he had also a vision while I was with him. But there he said, I see enormous stretches, devastated, enormous stretches of the earth. I think that if not more people try to reflect and take back their projections and take the opposites within themselves, there will be a total destruction."
So let's look it up, because I don't know about his deathbed visions. Okay, so Jung's deathbed vision is likely verifiable. His daughter did end up, I just learned, being an astrologer. I'll have to double check on that. Some folklore there. But the deathbed vision, if it's recorded by von Franz, it's going to be pretty solid. But tying that into an apocalyptic vision of the end time, I don't know if it's fair for you. So yeah, this website's tying it into climate change, and you could tie it into many things. But point being that it's not the gist of Jung's work, and I know that Jung would not want to have been set up as a prophet, even if there are these profound visions and they come as through his artistic spirit, his intuitive, visionary capacity. He wouldn't want to have had his legacy turned into a religious sort of like a religious apocalyptic message. It's just about understanding the way in which he's approaching this stuff is about speaking towards our psyches and our personal individual responsibility towards psychic processes and images, and not grand schemes and prophecies about what's to come. That's really the domain of religion, and that's okay. We can talk about religion. I'm not criticizing those feelings or desires or longings or interests, but merely sort of defending what and explaining what Jung was actually up to and what his texts, his collective works, the emphasis of those, the emphasis of what his collective works are all about. So thanks for listening. I'm Samuel Abelo. To the person behind the hero's journey, keep up your work. Keep reading Jung. I'm just trying to make a contribution to the community. Be well.